Hello, duelists. Professor Lex here, and I am here. Now, actually, look, I'm at the bottom right corner of the screen. Haha, here I am. Sorry, I'm still just not over this yet. In any case, today we are going to be talking a little bit more about the new upcoming metagame post-ban list here in just a few days. And in particular, I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of the tech choices that I think are going to be particularly good moving into the new format. We've already talked pretty extensively about decks, right? In my Season 21 post-ban list tier list video. You can go ahead and feel free to take a look at that if you want to see where I think a lot of the more popular / better decks are going to end up lining up here in the new meta. But I also wanted to take a moment here and make sure that we also discuss the techs that are going to be good in the new format as well, because as ban lists, formats, metas, decks tend to cycle, so do the cards, the staples that we play that end up being pretty good for each particular format. We'll talk about why these cards are going to be good and then why they haven't maybe seen as much play beforehand. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive straight into it. Alright, starting here at number 5. First card I want to talk about that I think is going to be potentially pretty good in the new upcoming meta is going to be Forbidden Droplet. This is a card that I have played quite a bit in the past, but haven't found myself playing as much here recently. This is because Forbidden Droplet is what is commonly known as a quote-unquote board breaker card. For those who are unfamiliar with the terminology, a board breaker card is one that's typically pretty good going second, in which it can be used to, well, break the opponent's board. Whether they have a bunch of negates or just a few, the idea of these cards is that you can use them to make sure that the board your opponent has established is not going to stop you from making your plays. Now, a lot of the reason that this card has not seen as much play, for me personally, it's still seen a decent bit of play, but the reason I haven't been playing it lately is a couple of reasons. One is that Droplet is the type of card that cannot be supported necessarily by every single deck. It is, of course, a very generic card, but if you want to be hitting multiple monsters on your opponent's board with Droplet, then you need to be sending multiple cards from either your hand or from the field to the graveyard. Not every deck is capable of giving up resources like this. There are a lot of decks that will do their whole turn one combo and have a lot of stuff on the board, but might not necessarily have a lot of things in hand left over to send with Droplet. So while Droplet is a fairly generic card, it is, again, one that does not necessarily go in every single deck. The second reason, and the reason that I have not been playing Droplet mainly in recent seasons, is because Tearlament honestly is not the kind of deck that Droplet is particularly good against. And while of course there have been other decks besides Tearlament that have seen success, Tearlament I think in a lot of ways did dictate a lot of the tech that we played in the metagame up until this new ban list here. Tearlament is a deck that has a lot of moving pieces, right? Even the monsters that are on its board might not necessarily be there by your turn, and also the effects that it's activating to disrupt you are primarily actually not going to be on the field. If we're thinking about like the fusers or like the shufflers, stuff like that, those all activate in the graveyard. So the type of deck that Droplet is good against are the kind of decks that I would expect to see very much moving forward post-ban list. It's going to be decks that kind of front load their board onto the field, all their disruptions onto the field. I'm thinking Dragon Link, right? Dragon Link often ends with like Borland plus Borload Savage Dragon or IP Masquerena. If you Droplet all of those, they often do not have follow-up plays unless they happen to have a Bestial in hand and you happen to be playing a deck that's susceptible to it. Similar to Sprite, right? Sprite will often try to end on, of course, like Elf, some combination of like Elf, Sprend, Gigantic, Masquerena, Red, Carrot, Melfi of the Forest, Melfi Caddy, so on and so forth. Droplet, again, very, very good at dismantling a board state like that. I'm also thinking about Sword Soul in particular, right? If Sword Soul isn't going to be tier 1, which I kind of suspect it will be in the new meta, then it's definitely going to be up there at the top of tier 2, and that is yet another deck that will front load pretty much all of its scary stuff right on the board there at the end of their first turn, right? The Chi Shao, the Baron, the Chi Xing Longyan, Cheng Yang, all that fun stuff. So with those three decks looking like they're probably going to be, if not the best three decks of the new meta, three of the best decks of the new meta, then I would definitely expect to find board breaker cards like Droplet finding a lot more of a home in a lot of these decks. If you don't have the URs for Forbidden Droplet, and or if you own other cards besides Droplet, some good alternatives, admittedly these are also URs, but Triple Tactics Talent is not a bad board breaker card. Dark Ruler No More is also a pretty good board breaker card, but do be advised that, you know, that card in particular is really only good going second. That's actually something I didn't really touch upon here with Droplet. Droplet, the other reason I really like it is because it's good whether you go first or second, which as we just discussed with like Dark Ruler No More, or Evenly Matched is another example of a board breaker card that's really only good going second. Droplet, however, you can set on your first turn, and then from there, you can potentially use it to stop your opponent from making plays. You can use it as disruption as well. Again, it is going to be a little bit costly of a form of disruption. You're going to have to give up a card from your hand or field. So we're just going to want to make sure that, again, we are only really playing Droplet in decks that can support the cost like that. But all in all, I think that Droplet is going to see a lot more play moving forward. Oh, and if you're wondering what kind of decks, you know, I think typically can, excuse me, afford to play the Droplet there, I'm thinking like a lot of Sprite variants can. Funnily enough, Pure Sprite actually has a bit of a harder time, but I'm thinking of like Tri-Brigade Sprite. Really anything with Tri-Brigades definitely does not mind pitching an extra kit or Nerval to the Droplet there. Twin Sprite is also another variant that can very easily support Droplet, as they not only often have the continuous spell left over on their field, but they actually sometimes even want to send either Kisakil or Leela with Droplet, so then they can use the Link 2 to bring the other twin back. So those kind of Sprite variants. Dragon Link, I think, can decently support Droplet. But I also think there are just better techs you can be playing in Dragon Link. And let's see, there was one other one that I had in mind. Really just any deck that really only uses a one-card combo, like Mathmech, that was the other one. Mathmech often only needs a circular combo, so and that's including the going second combo where you find lethal. So oftentimes you can just use all your other resources with the pitching them with the Droplet there. So yeah, Forbidden Droplet. As far as board breakers in particular go, I think that this is going to be the best one moving into the new meta. Alright, next card I want to talk about here is going to be the Psyframe Gear Gamma. So Psyframe Gear Gamma is a relatively popular form of disruption already. One thing that makes Gamma particularly good, actually a couple of things, are that unlike a lot of disruption cards, this will not only negate the actual monster effect, but then destroy it as well. Negating and destroying, that's exceptionally powerful, right? Like Valor and Imperm and stuff like that are already good enough just for negating the monster effect, but to actually remove the monster off the board can be pretty good. Now, you do actually want to be careful doing this against Kashtira, right? Because if you, for example, use Gamma against a Kashtira Unicorn, they could potentially just special summon a Fenrir from their hand. I think in that situation, it's probably still right to use the Gamma there, but just a little interaction with Kashtira you want to be mindful of. Of course, the big kind of drawback to running Gamma is that you have to run the Psyframe driver, the vanilla monster, as well. But the fact that Gamma summons both itself and the driver to the board, actually a pretty big buff, and any deck that has level 8 synchros especially really likes using Psyframe Gear Gamma, because if you can actually get the Psyframe Gear Gamma off during your turn, then it becomes a lot better. You don't necessarily have to have level 8 synchros, like you could use this in the driver to link summon as well, so on and so forth, but it does also nicely give you a level 2 tuner and a level 6 non-tuner. And I think that this interaction, particularly of using Gamma on your turn and then using it to then go into further plays, be it a synchro or a link summon or what have you, is going to be a lot of why I think Gamma is going to get slightly better moving into this new meta. This is actually something that can technically be applied already right now today. I already think Gamma is better than it has been in recent seasons, and honestly, the major reason for this are the Kashtira monsters. Now, Kashtira as an archetype has not been seeing a whole lot of like super rousing success, right? Like I called the deck tier 3 on my latest tier list there, the post-ban list one. It's debatably still the top of Rogue. However, as cards, Kashtira Fenrir and Unicorn, but especially Fenrir, have been proving to be very prevalent in many different meta decks. And for that reason, a lot of people, myself included, are starting to play differently ability to play around those. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hex, didn't you just say that Gamma was kind of mid against the Kashtira monsters? Like, why would they be a reason to actually start playing the Gamma now? Well, it's not directly the Kashtira monsters, but more something that's come as a result of them being a part of the meta. And that's the fact that many players, myself included, lately have been throwing out the Maxi during the draw phase. I've been already doing this quite a bit lately, in months past, just to kind of play around Triple Tactics talent as that card became more and more popular. But now I think it's right to do it to Maxi draw phase. I mean, pretty much every single time. I really do think that is the case, because when you have these Kashtira monsters that can special summon themselves from the hand without actually starting a new chain, that can be a bit of a problem when it comes to trying to play Max C, because they get a summon in before you Max C. Not only that, but if you try to Max C afterward, the Finir/Unicorn will activate to either banish a card on your field, or if it's Unicorn in your extra deck, face down, which definitely complicates things when it comes to, again, just trying to resolve the Max C. So, because a lot of people are throwing out the Maxi during the draw and standby phase, which again I do actually think is correct, I suspect that Gamma is, again, going to be, and actually also currently, a lot better than a lot of people might think. It's, again, just the fact that it's a disruption plus an extender is so strong, especially an extender that gives you two bodies, right? We've already been seeing how good it can be to be both disruption and an extender when it comes to the bestial monsters. That's what makes them so strong, is not only do they stop your opponent from making a play, and in the case of Druid Swarm or Baldrake might be able to do that even more so on a follow-up, but they also throw an extra body on the board, and if you're Magnum Hut or Saranir, then you even get a little bit of advantage off of that, be that a search or sending the Lubellion and setting that up in your graveyard. So, yeah, the fact that, you know, the Gamma here, again, will not only negate and destroy your opponent's card, but then also give you not just one but two bodies, so good. I think that any deck that's playing a level 8 Synchro monster, period, that it regularly wants to summon, should heavily consider playing Gamma moving into the new format. And again, even decks that are not relying on these level 8 Synchros can still make use of the Gamma to link summon. I'm thinking of like Sprite in particular, right? Like if you Gamma on your turn while you're playing Sprite, you can just link the Gamma and the Driver straight into either a Sprint or an Elf. That's insane. Like the ability to put out like an instant Link 2 in Sprite is nuts. And again, I just think that this card is going to be very good in the very near future. Already good. Already a great card in this current meta, and the meta will only continue to favor it more moving forward. Alright, next let's go ahead and talk about Effect Veiler here. Effect Veiler is the kind of card that you think would see a lot more play than it actually does, but of course because of infinite impermanence existing, Veiler kind of tends to be a bit more niche in its use. Right now, a lot of decks that are playing Veiler are ones that can make use of not only the disruption, but also potentially the body as well. The fact that it's a light level 1 tuner can be relevant sometimes, particularly for like Dragon Link, or even though I don't particularly play it a lot in Punk variants that are playing Chaos Ruler, you can use Chaos Ruler to find the Veiler. And in that regard, Veiler is already a pretty decent card, but I expect that Veiler is going to continue to get even better in the new meta. You might be thinking, well, Hex, you know, if Veiler is good, wouldn't most people just play Imperm, except for, you know, the decks that you were mentioning, the ones that play Chaos Ruler? I think, and this is something that, of all these predictions, I could actually see this one kind of not coming to fruition the most, but in my opinion, it's going to be very much correct to play 3 Imperm in the new meta, so much so that I think a lot of decks will actually be considering playing some amount of Effect Veilers in addition to the 3 Imperm that they would already be playing. A few reasons for this. One being that I think that monster effect negation is going to be at a premium in the new meta. Again, if we're just thinking about all these decks that we're expecting to be particularly good post-ban list, right? I'm kind of thinking about like Dragon Link, in particular Sword Soul, I tend to, at least I personally, tend to very highly value monster effect negation against decks like this. I especially, now against Dragon Link, right? It's not like Sword Soul, where often with Sword Soul, the one monster effect negate on like the Moye is often enough to just end their turn. Dragon Link, that happens a little bit less often, right? Dragon Link, you often need multiple forms of disruption in order to make sure that we're hitting their cards there, or we're hitting their plays rather. And I think that's actually another reason to play Valor in addition to Imperm. One of the nice things about Valor and Imperm both is that they're, unlike stuff like Maxi and Ash Blossom, Ghost Ogre, Ghost Spell, so on and so forth, those are all limited to once per turn. And I think that these monster effect negates that you can potentially use multiple of in a turn are, again, just going to be very valuable moving forward. When we're playing Maxi, we want to make sure that we're drawing enough sufficient negates. And the other thing, too, is that, the other kind of up that Valor has over Imperm is that, of course, if you draw the Imperm off the Maxi, but you have cards in the field, it doesn't do anything for you. And actually, I will say this, too. A lot of the time, my opponent maxis me when I'm going second. That's a big part of why I'm usually not afraid to play into the sea. Now, the majority reason is that I usually just intend to win that turn. But if my opponent has cards on their field, then I already know that Imperm can't stop me. So Valor being able to get around that restriction is actually pretty good. Of course, Valor does in turn have the restriction that can only be used during your opponent's main phase. So it's not like Imperm where you can potentially set it and then use it on your turn if needed. Imperm also has the functionality of negating stuff in the column, which can come up sometimes. So in those regards, I think that Imperm is overall the better card between it and Effect Valor, but I wouldn't discount Effect Valor. And I know I've been talking about running one or two Valors in addition to 3 Imperm, but I can actually see a world where it's right to run like 1 Valor, 2 Imperm for not only the variety off of Max C there, but also if you're playing Crossout Designator. If Valor does end up seeing a lot more play in this particular metagame, then I think that it's important to have the ability to stop that with something like Crossout. Of course, you can always stop Valor with Call By as well, but just having the option, I find, helps. In a lot of ways, I think the meta that we're about to move into is actually very similar to the meta we had way back before Tier Limits and before the Ishizu cards, when we were kind of in that in-between with Mathmech meta, and then Sprite came out after that. I think that the metagame we're going to be seeing moving forward is going to be very similar to that metagame in particular. And Valor was pretty good during that meta. I definitely played my fair share of Valor in Mathmech and other decks there. Again, I think it's just a combination of and not just that the decks that are going to be in the meta are Valor is good against, but again, if we're thinking about like Dragon Link and Sword Soul, those are the kind of decks that also want to play Valor. Again, not just because of its ability to negate stuff, but also because of their ability to be a level 1 tuner can often be very, very relevant for decks like that. Also the fact that it's light, again, if you're playing Chaos Ruler, you should highly consider playing Effect Valor if you have the room for it. A lot of the Punk variants I've played don't necessarily, and even then Pure/Cash Punk doesn't always play Chaos Ruler, so but yeah, stuff like Dragon Link, again, I think should definitely be playing Valor moving forward here. So we have a couple more cards to talk about. Let's go into the next one. Alright, so this is a card that I've already mentioned a couple of times as we've talked about other cards that are going to be good in the upcoming meta. But number 2 here on the list of my top 5 cards that are going to be, top 5 tech cards that are going to be most impactful in the new format is going to be Kashtira Fenrir. Now, to be fair, Kashtira Fenrir has not been in the game very long up until this point, but despite that, it's already proven itself to be very much a mainstay of the format. There are very few decks that I think would not at all consider playing Fenrir. Mostly decks that either don't have room for it or actively can't make use of it. Like, Fenrir's presence on the board will be a proactive hindrance. Some archetypes need the archetype lock, obviously it's not playable and stuff like Fluandaries, so on and so forth. But I think that Fenrir is good in pretty much every single meta deck right now. This card is often compared to Pankratops, and that is a pretty apt comparison in terms of how the cards function, but in terms of quality, Kashtira Fenrir is just so far above Pank. It's kind of ridiculous, honestly. Fenrir kind of does, like, literally everything. It's like the Bestials, it's another example, and also like Cypher Gear Gamma during your turn. It's another good example of something that acts as both disruption and an extender. And on top of that, it also serves another very unique role to act as bait for the opponent's disruption. There are so many times where I'll special Fenrir. I'll be playing something like Sprite or Math Mech that I've been testing lately, so on and so forth. Just a deck that's not Kashtira, and I'll special summon Kashtira Fenrir, and my opponent will stop and think, and then I'll activate Fenrir's effect, and they'll stop and think, and then they'll throw out a piece of negation for it. And that's always such a good feeling when it happens. So in that regard, I kind of have to advocate against using stuff like Ash Blossom or Imperm Veiler against the search effect of Kashtira Fenrir, because if it is Kashtira, you'll have other monster effects that are still good to negate. And the more likely case is that it's not going to be Kashtira, just because, again, Fenrir is seeing play in so many decks. You could even give a bit of an honorable mention to the Kashtira Unicorn here as well, because Kashtira Unicorn also is seeing a lot of very generic play right now. So, yeah, I think that the Fenrir is a very, very good card. Again, there are decks out there that don't want to play Fenrir. There are even decks that like can play it but don't necessarily have the room. I kind of think that Dragon Link is that way. I kind of do, honestly. Dragon Link is a deck that already goes well above 40 cards the vast majority of the time. It usually plays like 43 to 45, right? Just to be able to fit everything it already wants to play. And while you could play Fenrir, and it wouldn't even be that bad, or really bad at all, honestly, again, it just comes down to main deck room. I don't think Dragon Link has the main deck room to be also jamming 2 Kashtira Fenrirs, in addition to everything else they need to play, which is a lot. Like, when you take everything that Dragon Link needs to play just to function as a deck, I'm not exaggerating when I say that already puts you at like 37 to 38 cards. Like, the deck has extremely little wiggle room, and that's also not including stuff like the second Collapse Serpent, Rocket Synchron and or Caliber, so on and so forth. Other stuff that I would definitely consider a lot more vital than Kashtira Fenrir. So you do need to like really kind of evaluate, do I actually have the main deck room for it? But I think in just about any deck where you're at 38 or fewer cards and you've already fit everything you need to, just jam the 2 Fenrir. This card is good in like everything. Just play this card, I promise. It's really good. And finally, last card we're going to talk about. Number 1. This is my number 1 tech choice for the upcoming meta, which probably does not come as a surprise to a lot of people. It is going to be Nibiru, the Primal Being. This monster has not seen a lot of play at all in Master Duel. In fact, I've gone on the record in the last few months many times saying Nibiru is not a real threat, it doesn't exist, and you don't need to worry about it. And that honestly has been the case up till this point. And it's not just a superfluous statement. I don't think it was right to play Nibiru before this current meta, pretty much ever since Tier Limits came out. It's probably pretty obvious why Nibiru doesn't really do a lot against Tier Limits. While Tiers do often go well above 5 summons on pretty much any given turn, they are all triggered by going to the graveyard, which Nibiru will send them straight there. So the other thing that's really awkward too, right, is that when thinking about how when thinking about how Tiers would do like their main combo line, like the mill 8 feel great play, by the time you can even summon the Nibiru, your opponent probably doesn't even have a very impactful board. Like, they're probably just going to be sitting on like a Rhinoheart and a Merly and maybe like a Roll Close, but which again are all things that'll just trigger, come back, and just proc in general off of the Nibiru here. So it's not only just Tier Limits though. It's also Sprite was a bit of a factor. Now, when we had our Sprite meta before the Ishizu or Tier Limit cards came to Master Duel, at that point in time, a lot of people had cut Nibiru from their decks, citing the reason of Gigantic Sprite, 2-locking both players when it's activated, making Nibiru not worth playing anymore. I disagreed at the time, and looking back as a retrospective, I still think that I was right. In pre-Tier Limit Sprite meta, pre-Ishizu Sprite meta, it was still right to play Nibiru. Even if sprites were a very good deck, they weren't so prominent that the presence of Gigantic alone was reason to not play Nib. However, even after Tearlance stopped being tier 0, they themselves not only had enough representation, but combined with how much people were playing sprites and something Gigantic, made Nibiru still really not worth playing up to this point. So, what has changed? Well, the main and most obvious thing is that Tearlance, while they will still be a deck, they're going to be much less of a deck moving forward. And Tearlance also plays so dramatically differently that I think that all tier variants pretty much need to be adding some kind of supplemental engine. And when you add supplemental engines, it becomes easier for Nibiru to be effective against a deck like Tearlament. And same with sprites, even though I do project that sprite and its variants will be pretty good moving forward. As I have just previously stated, I don't think that sprite being good is enough of a reason in and of itself to not play Nibiru. Particularly, again, we look at decks that are forecasted to be very good. We have our Sword Souls, we have our Dragon Link mainly, is the one I'm mainly thinking about Nibiru. But even Sword Soul, right? Sword Soul often gets the Baron out as like the 6th or 7th summon. You can nib them usually if they do like a, Moye into Token, into Chi-Shao, into Longyan, into Token. That Token is summon number 5 right there. So Nib ends up being pretty good against Sword Soul a lot of the time. Nib is okay against Branded, which I still think is going to kind of be a thing, but it's particularly good against Mathmech, which I think will be a thing. I think the main deck that I could see kind of hindering Nib from being as good as it was before, besides to an extent Sprite and tier variants, is Lab. I think the prominence of Labyrinth in the meta will obviously make you sad when you draw Nibiru against that particular deck, but I think that's few enough of the decks out there. I think that's a little bit, or it's little enough. God, the English language is so weird. There's not going to be enough labs to justify not playing Nib. That's what I'm getting at here. Yeah, Nibiru, I don't think it's even a contest. I gotta be real with you. I really don't think it's even close. I think Nibiru is, among not only the cards you discussed, but tech choices in general, just gonna be an all-star in the new format. Definitely be ready to count your summons in Master Duel again, because the rock is coming. But I think that's going to go ahead and do it for this video. So hope you all found this information helpful. Hope you all are enjoying the new PixelTuber avatar as well. I didn't talk about that too much in this video because this is the first video with one. I didn't want that to be the focus of it, but I'm really excited. I am in love with this model and I am looking forward to using it more and more here on the channel. So thank you all very much. Thank you, class, for this particular lesson here at Master Duel Academy. Let's just go ahead and move now to our outro. Alright, everybody, thank you so much for watching all the way to the very end of the video like this. That means a whole lot to me. Not just personally, but it's also a great way of supporting the channel as well. If you're interested in supporting the channel in other means, you can of course feel free to comment and or subscribe right here on YouTube. I'm always looking to the comments section. You guys leave some pretty awesome feedback as far as like constructive criticism goes when it comes to deck building, gameplay, channel content, all that stuff. So feel free to leave your opinion down there. I will be sure to take a look at that there. And then subscribing is going to be the best way to get notifications of when these videos drop. That does happen every day, by the way, so if you're looking for daily Master Duel content, you've come to the right place. And there are more places where you can get some daily Master Duel content. If you check out the description below, follow the top link over to my Patreon page. There, for just $5 a month, which is as much as you pay for a booster pack, you'll find a lot more value than a pack full of filler over there. We've got some previews for content upcoming here on the channel. We've got some exclusive games that are only posted over on Patreon over there. We've got some Q&As, and then you can also have your name featured in this lovely credit sequence where I thank all of the people who are helping contribute over there on Patreon. It's a huge support to the channel, and it really means a lot as well. So thank you everyone who is donating that is featured here on screen. And again, you know, it's not just a pure donation. You do get some more daily Master Duel content over there just for being a part of the Patreon. But I think that's about all the time that I have for today's video. Once again, I just want to thank you so very much for sticking all the way to the end of the video. Again, it just means a lot, as I do put a decent amount of work into getting these videos out every single day. But that's about all the time that I've got for now, so without further ado, this is XLex. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.